A 5-month investigation found by nearly every measure, kids in special ed in Washington lag behind much of the country, from test scores to graduation rates.
King 5 investigator Susanna Frame is here with her new series. It's called Back of the Class.
David and Amanda, there are more than 150,000 students in special education in the state. That includes everyone from a child with ADHD or dyslexia or severe autism. We found many problems with our system of serving these students, including a funding model that not only doesn't pay for what our kids need, but one that top state officials say is against the law.
Like most 6-year-olds, Noah Leg Lopez is busy going to parks, playing games on his iPad, and spending time with mom.
We call it getting out his wiggles.
But unlike most kids his age, he's not busy going to school.
And that was our plan, and it just blew up.
At age 2, doctors diagnosed Noah with severe autism. He's nonverbal and needs help with nearly every task.
Wait, let's finish pizza.
It's the state's constitutional duty to provide Noah with a free and appropriate education. It's federal law, too. Instead, like thousands of other children with learning disabilities, he's fallen victim to Washington state's decades-old, underfunded, and neglected special education system.
We have enough battles that we fight all the time, above and beyond what a neurotypical kiddo might face. Just getting a basic education should not be one of them.
Last June, Noah's mom, Lindsay, got priced out of her Kirkland apartment.
Come here, no. The rent went up from $1,800 to $2,000.
So she considered moving to the small Snohomish County town of Index, where it was actually affordable to buy a home.
And I was just like, okay, this is my dream.
With Noah's special needs, call number 1 went to the Index School District. Could they educate her child?
You were told, come on in.
Correct, yes, before I even put an offer on a house.
We were just ready to start our lives here.
So Lindsay, a single mom and full-time nurse, packed up and moved 43 miles north to this idyllic spot in Index, right above the Skykomish River. She got busy installing features like this fence and extra lighting, especially for Noah.
I mean, it was just perfect for him.
Lindsay tried to work with Index to get a plan together, but emails show the school admitted since they were so small, they couldn't support her son, and the surrounding districts were full up. School started in September with no chair in the kindergarten class for Noah.
It was just unbelievable to me. We just kind of felt like shoved to the side.
The King 5 investigators have found that out of roughly 300 school districts in the state, Index is one of 109, more than a third, in deep financial trouble when it comes to special ed. That's because these districts are over what's called the cap.
What's the cap? Let's say you're a school district with 100 students. The state will pay you extra money for up to 13 and a half of them with disabilities, 13.5% of your population. If you're over that, like an Index, tough luck. You'll have to find the money for those kids on your own. We're the only state in the country with a hard and fast cap.
It's appalling. It's writing off a generation of children.
Kathy George is an attorney and special education funding expert in the state.
It's a very deliberate and conscious choice to underfund special education for financial reasons. And there's a willingness by the legislature to let this inequity continue.
Strap. Zip. Yeah, good job.
Back in Index, after nearly 2 months of no school and no structure,
You ready?
Lindsay and Noah hit the road.
So we were commuting from Index to Kirkland 5 days a week.
Instead of driving 3 minutes to the Index school, they were driving 3 hours a day. So Noah could attend specialized therapy sessions at the Connection Center in Kirkland.
Sit up.
Instead of a free education, Lindsay got a second job to pay hundreds of dollars a month for the therapy and the gas to get there.
It was horrible. It was awful.
It's not just the kids in capped districts like Index getting short shrift. The legislature is underfunding the state's entire special ed program. To make up, last year districts had to scrape together another $165 million. And remember, it's the state's legal duty to pay for all of it.
What grade would you give the state of Washington in serving special needs kids?
We get an F. There's no two ways about it.
Representative Jerry Pollitt of Seattle is the legislature's top special education advocate.
That's just ridiculous. It's wrong. It deprives children of their constitutional right.
Our investigation found our woefully funded system is leaving special ed students at the back of the class. Take dropout rates. We rank 46 out of 48 states reporting with a rate of 34%. A third of the kids dropping out. Only South Carolina and Utah are doing worse. As for graduation, an analysis of federal records shows only 58% of our special ed students are getting diplomas. Just 12 states have worse numbers.
We got a lot of work to do.
Chris Rakedahl is the superintendent of public instruction, in office for a year. He says his #1 priority is special education. And here's what he thinks about our state's cap on it.
I think some people will be surprised to hear our highest education official in the state say, I think we're breaking the law.
I think we are, but I've always said that.
Also coming soon.
After 4 months of those long, expensive drives to therapy, both Noah and Lindsay had it. She up and sold the house.
And that was really hard, to have our own space finally that was like perfect for both of us, and then it's just vanishes.
With her savings wiped out, Lindsay moved their entire lives to this apartment in Redmond, into a district that can hopefully support Noah's civil right to simply go to school.
He should be able to have everything that any other kid should have, you know, and that's like a goal as a mom. And for him to not be able to have that is just unbelievable.
They see these kids isolated in a class, like, you know, a leper colony or something. These are the untouchables. And they don't know what makes these kids tick. It's just so sad.
Tonight, the King 5 investigators revealed that Washington has a shameful track record of taking our students in special education and then segregating them. More often than nearly every other state in the entire country, Washington violates federal law. So this happens because students with disabilities are excluded from regular classrooms.
As King 5's Susanna Frame reports in her ongoing investigation, Back of the Class, decades of science reveals this isn't good for any student, whether they have a disability or not.
The little boy in this grainy home video is 13-year-old Sam Clayton, an 8th grader attending his first ever school dance.
He really wanted to go, and he'd never done that before. And I thought, well, yeah, let's just take him. You know, he likes music.
This February, parents Sandy and Rob were so proud their special needs son with Down syndrome wanted to join in. But standing in the back of the gym that day, the parents' hearts sank. They realized while Sam was surrounded by kids, he was really alone.
No one spoke to him. No one came and said, hi, Sam. No one danced with him. No one took a selfie with him. He was aware. He was aware that there were no kids around him.
Sam's parents don't blame the kids, but the isolating culture created by administrators at his school, Taffet-Sahaly Middle School in Federal Way. In Sam's 3 years there, he spent every single day, all day, in a self-contained classroom with other disabled students. Zero interaction with the other kids.
How does it make you feel to know that he is being segregated?
It's really hard. He's got so much to offer.
We saw that firsthand. Sam loves people. During our visit, I got lots of hugs, and so did my fellow reporter, Taylor. He even thanked our photographer, Pete, for taking a shot of his finished homework.
Thank you, Pete. He brightens everyone's day. He really likes to make people feel happy. He likes to make people laugh, and he likes them to be loved.
But 99% of his middle school classmates don't know that. Even at lunch, Sam's separated.
That's what the other kids see. They see these kids isolated in a class, like, you know, a leper colony or something. These are the untouchables. And they don't know what makes these kids tick. It's just so sad. It's just so sad.
By federal law, students have this civil right. To the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities should be in class with children who aren't disabled, with aids and services to help them succeed.
Word interjects.
But like Sam, thousands of children in Washington state are shut out of regular classrooms. Our investigation found only 54% of our kids with disabilities spend a majority of their day in general ed. And for students with intellectual disabilities like Down syndrome and autism, that number's down to 5%. Only 2 states in the country, Nevada and Illinois, have a number worse than that.
And why is that? It's cheaper.
It saves money to huddle resources for special ed students in one classroom.
Writing, yes, thank you.
Putting one-on-one aides and other specialists out into the building is expensive, but if a student needs it, that's what the law calls for. Kathy George is a special education attorney and advocate.
They're treated as if they're not entitled to learn the same as their peers, and that's absolutely wrong under federal law.
The Claytons try to make up for Sam's segregated school life by getting him out into the community.
Good job.
He's a swimmer, a drummer, a church member, ukulele player.
Very good.
But his parents worry at school, he's the disabled kid.
It breaks my heart that there are kids in his school who may not understand, that don't understand what Down syndrome is, that may be afraid of it.
Not only is Washington violating federal and state inclusion laws, but our system is ignoring inclusion science. Study after study, 3 decades worth, shows kids with disabilities make better progress when they spend time in regular classrooms.
And what the research tells us is that children with disabilities do better when they're in inclusive classrooms, and children without disabilities do as well.
Dr. Eileen Schwartz is a special education expert at the University of Washington.
Special education is a service, and that service should be implemented where it's most appropriate for the child, not where it's most convenient for the adult.
Historically, the Washington State Legislature has knowingly underfunded special education, and it's cost us. Federal data analyzed by the King 5 investigator shows only 58% of our special ed kids are graduating from high school, and 34% are dropping out. Only 2 other states have a dropout rate that's worse.
What was this one about?
In Sam's case, Federal Way's approach isn't doing the job. Records show he isn't close to meeting the vast majority of his goals in reading, math, or social skills. Instead of rethinking the structure, administrators stuck to Plan A of keeping Sam separate.
Legalities aside, it's a moral shame.
The Claytons are hoping next year will be better when Sam heads off to high school. Hoping for a setting where he won't be seen as different, separate, defined by disability.
I think it's just wrong on so many levels, and not just for Sam, but for, you know, the other kids in the school. It's an opportunity lost. We can't get this through these 3 years back.
In the small, peaceful farming community of Mabton, Washington, injustice rolled through the side roads of the valley for years. On school buses, buses carrying students with severe disabilities, like Anthony Moran, a nonverbal 17-year-old with acute autism and epilepsy.
They make it very obvious, you know, that my son's different, and he's going to be receiving, you know, different treatment.
Whoa.
Here's what was different for Anthony and an unknown number of other kids with the greatest needs. The Mabton School District bused them home an hour earlier than the rest of the student body, not once a week or once a month, but every single day, every single week, year after year after year, for at least a decade, and possibly much longer.
And they lied to me. They lied to me about it.
Anthony's mom, Lorena, assumed this was routine across the state.
You know, it would happen to all the kids in his classroom. That's why I never noticed, you know, that I could say something about a school schedule, because all the kids in his classroom were receiving that treatment.
The hours quickly add up. If you bus a child home an hour early a day from 1st to 12th grade, that robs the student of 2 entire years of education. 2 years in the classroom lost.
How does my son get all that back? You know, like, all those hours that he missed of school. You know, how do you repay him for that?
In a 3-month investigation analyzing hundreds of district and legal records, King 5 has found discrimination in Mabton didn't stop on the bus. Kids were denied the basic services the law requires for them to succeed. In Anthony's case, the district ignored his #1 need, a way to communicate. He desperately needed a communication device like a specially programmed iPad to express himself. Experts recommended the device over and over for 4 straight years. Still no iPad, but plenty of excuses.
I'm still working on it. It's a little bit more complicated than what we thought, but we're gonna get it for him.
Anthony Moran spent his entire educational career at Mabton, from pre-K to high school. In all those years, he went to school, but didn't get an education. Records show dozens of his classroom goals repeated without change from grade to grade, like identifying a phone number, writing his name, and using a sponge to clean up spills. For years, no documented progress in any area. He can't read, write, or communicate.
Oh, it's like saying, hey, your child is different. He does not deserve what, sorry. It is hard to talk about it.
The system failed him.
Arzu Farrow is director of the Washington Autism Alliance. She says there's never an excuse for a child making 0 gains in school.
I have yet to come across a person who does not make progress. I have not met anyone with autism who does not learn.
Really?
I have not. Every individual can learn.
You want help?
How could Anthony make no progress? Remember, early busing means he's already lost nearly 2 years of instruction. And a review of daily logs shows when he was in school, there was more warehousing than learning. Instead of working on goals, Anthony got repeated timeouts, trips to the office, and naps. Day after day, struggling to communicate, Anthony was falling asleep, throwing tantrums, and getting in trouble for behaviors directly related to his disability, and according to experts, his inability to express his wants and needs.
Do you think someone should be held accountable?
Yeah, they should. You know, you're responsible for educating a child. You failed at it.
We wanted to ask Superintendent Minerva Morales, the district's top official, about dismissing the needs of disabled students and the unlawful busing schedule.
Hi, Ms. Morales. I'm Susanna Frame from King TV. We're here to talk to you about the special education program at the Mabton School District. We're wondering why the kids were bused home, the special ed kids were bused home year after year.
After she denied our repeated requests for an interview, we found her at home in her front yard.
So I'm not.
That's why I'm sorry that we were here, because we were trying to get you at the school and so forth.
I'm sorry, I'm not available to talk right now. But I'm sorry, I just can't.
Can you respect the privacy, please?
Yeah, I can, but don't you have something to say to the students that were bused home early?
Back at Anthony's house, his mom wonders what could have been. What's the future for her son, who she says a school district discarded because he was born with a disability?
And then they tell you, you know, like, your son's different. He doesn't deserve what other kids have or what other kids are going to get. It's tough.
Now at 7, the King 5 investigators expose that in the state of Washington, schools are kicking kids with disabilities out of school at an alarming rate.
A King 5 investigator, Susanna Frame, joins us with her ongoing series on special ed called Back of the Class.
Amanda and Greg, we found that Washington State is one of the worst states in the country in punishing disabled kids for behaviors beyond their control, behaviors directly related to their disability. And that's a violation of state and federal law.
Dogs are adorable and they're so excited to see people because they're stuck in cages, and I absolutely hate seeing that.
Come on. This is one of Austin Dillinger's favorite pastimes, volunteering at the animal shelter.
They need freedom like us.
Where he says he can relate to how the dogs probably feel. Unwanted, like they don't belong.
And how does that make you feel, to have a label that's different than the other kids?
Lonely. Like at lunch, at school, I'll sit alone and like no one comes around, says hi or anything. And when I try to join them at lunch, most of them will move to a different table. It sucks.
Austin's label in middle school, troublemaker. The student constantly thrown out of school for refusing to follow the rules. Dozens of behavior reports describe an obstinate kid hell-bent on causing chaos in the classroom with his explosive outbursts. His teacher wrote Austin shows willful noncompliance and a refusal to follow directions or participate.
It felt like I was like one of the worst kids that there ever was, because they're just constantly sending me home.
But listen to this. Evaluations from the University of Washington and other experts show the behaviors getting Austin kicked out of school weren't his fault. He has ADHD and autism, and like thousands of other children in the state, he was punished repeatedly for conduct directly related to his disability. And that's against the law.
The King 5 investigators have found Washington has one of the worst track records in the country for punishing special education students. Only 9 states kick more kids with disabilities out of school. And look at our neighboring states. On average, Washington suspends 3 times more special education students than Oregon and 33 times more than Idaho. Think of that. 33 times more often than the state next door.
These students basically are getting left behind.
Eunice Cho is an attorney with the ACLU, which is suing OSPI, the agency responsible for overseeing public schools. They say the state has allowed districts to get away with misusing discipline for years.
The school is saying, you're disposable, you're not worth it, you're not supposed to be in our schools anyway, and a lot of them have to give up.
It was hard for Austin, who's now 14, to not give up. Even though he scores above average in many subjects, his middle school report cards were loaded with D's and F's. And it's no wonder. Attendance records show in middle school, he was excluded from class 107 days. That's 22 weeks of school, 22 weeks of missing classes, instruction, and assignments. This is his mom, Christina.
It was just so difficult to get the school district to understand that he wasn't just a naughty kid. And it didn't matter what kind of medical rebuttal I had to defend him, they weren't buying it.
We found this unlawful practice is widespread in Washington, and it's getting worse. State records show in 2013, kids with disabilities were suspended at twice the rate of kids without disabilities. And by 2017, they were kicked out nearly 2.5 times the rate of the typical learners.
The old default of kicking them out and turning that into long-term suspension has not served anybody well.
The state's top education official, Chris Rakedahl, admits the state's had outdated discipline policies for decades.
We're talking about having our entire teaching corps rethink what it means to have a disability. It's the hardest thing we do here, is transforming the existing teaching profession into new behaviors. But that's our job.
Okay. Sorry, babe.
It's okay.
Do you want to go outside for a sec?
During our interview with Austin and his mom, Austin started showing signs of shutting down and needed a break. We asked what was upsetting him.
Just hearing about what happened in the past.
How does that make you feel, thinking about the past?
Sad. Hi, Levi.
When he grows up, Austin wants to be an engineer for Apple. But his mom worries how the school system's failures have already damaged her son's self-worth, opportunities, and dreams.
I've been so angry and caught up in figuring it out that I haven't even had the time to feel sad. But it hurts. He's lost so much just because he has a disability.
King 5 investigators exposed that thousands of kids with special needs who act out are being restrained and isolated in closet-like rooms in schools around the state. 3 years ago, the legislature passed a law banning these practices unless there's an immediate threat of serious harm to a student or a teacher.
But as King 5 investigator Susanna Frame reports in her ongoing series, Back of the Class, schools in Washington have been slow to follow state law and federal guidelines, and it shows restraint and isolation don't teach kids anything and can scar them for years to come.
This is Blackie and Black Bud.
This summer, we got to meet one of the most charismatic kids we've ever come across.
He's a completely black pig. Even his eyes are black.
7-year-old Braden Hafey.
Yet there's still few pieces of it left.
Braden dashed all over his family's Olympia farm to give us a full-blown tour.
This is our 8-goat at a time milking stand.
Braden's sense of freedom on the farm stopped at the steps of his school, Michael T. Simmons Elementary in the Tumwater School District. Inside, the school has this padded, tiny room with one window and a lock on the door. And that's where Braden spent a lot of time in his kindergarten and first grade years, at age 5 and 6, isolated and alone.
It made me scared because it was just this little room with one light and a few pillows.
A little room with one
light.
Braden ended up in that room for violent outbursts. He has autism and has a hard time staying on task. He'll tell you that himself.
It's hard for me to not do stuff since what's it called again? Autism.
You have autism.
Yeah.
His frustrations at school led to unsafe behaviors, punching and scratching students, kicking teachers, and throwing things at staff. But school records also show he was sent into isolation for lesser offenses such as breaking pencils, throwing markers, running around the class, and not staying on his beanbag chair.
It made me feel kind of worried that they were just going to lock me and leave me in there.
Leave you in there?
Mm-hmm.
That would be scary, huh?
Mm-hmm.
3 years ago, the state of Washington passed its first ever law on isolation and restraint, saying it's only to be used as a last resort when there's an imminent likelihood of serious harm to the student or another person.
He's 45, 50 pounds and 4 foot tall. How dangerous can he be?
Over here with Mrs. Mama.
Braden's one of thousands of special education students across the state being isolated or physically restrained at school. Despite the law meant to clamp down on the practices, in the 2016-17 school year, more than 33,000 incidents were reported to the state, involving about 6,700 students. School districts with glaringly high numbers include Spokane, Lake Washington, Bellingham, Edmonds, Kelso, and Vancouver.
We're supposed to be beyond the days when restraint and isolation were routine.
Kathy George is a special ed attorney.
It just shows somebody's not getting it, right? Not somebody, a lot of school personnel are not getting it.
Research shows the controversial practice of isolation and restraint is not only outdated, but it doesn't work. In 2009 and again in 2012, the U.S. Department of Education warned states that restraint and isolation should be avoided to the greatest extent possible, and that there's no evidence it's effective in stopping the problem behaviors in the first place. Instead, positive behavior programs should be developed.
We owe them much better.
Special ed advocates like Representative Jerry Pollitt say the problem boils down to money. The state hasn't funded training and the supports needed to adopt positive behavior alternatives.
You know what the cheapest thing is? Put a kid in an isolation booth.
In a closet.
Yeah.
In Braden's case, isolation wasn't working. The behaviors weren't getting any better. Yet the staff continued to use it over and over. On one day, they put him in the room 6 different times. The King 5 investigators reviewed Braden's school records and found in a 1.5-year time span, he was sent into isolation 56 separate times.
It's heartbreaking. You know, you wonder if there was anything you could have done more to fix it.
By the middle of Braden's first grade year, the isolation room wasn't just a lonely and scary place, but a dangerous one as well. He started hurting himself inside, banging his head on the door and window. He went to a therapist for symptoms of PTSD and lost all self-confidence.
It made me feel like they don't want me.
Well, that's sad, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And how did that make you feel?
A little bit upset.
It got so bad, his mom yanked him out of school altogether.
It just breaks my heart. He's 7. No kid should feel that way. You know, it's like the foundation years, it just no kid should experience any of this or feel like that they're a failure or think that they're bad. That's wrong.